So today I'm here with Bart Kay. He is a professor of exercise physiology. Previous professor. He's done a great deal of work in the academic community. He's got years and years of experience, probably more experience than my age in some regard. I'm hoping that Ted will join today as well. So I'm not going to bother introducing him anymore. He's very popular and he's a key figure in our community, so I'm glad to have him on today.
Yes, Yellow Ted is an absolute key member of our community. You're quite right. It's very good to have Ted with us. And in fact, Ted, is there anything you'd like to say?
Bollocks!
Oh, God, he can't behave for a second, can he? He's incredible. Right.
Thanks for a day every time. So the reason I wanted to bring you on today was to go over the whole exercise physiology stuff.
Okay.
But this is my first question. We kind of left off on the last video talking about different methodologies and how specific training needs to be.
Yeah.
So it is, why do people feel we need to have an aerobic base for exercise, and why is that concept wrong?
Right. Okay, so the idea of an aerobic base comes from false idea that as your exercise intensity increases up towards your maximum volitional exhaustive exercise level, that one of the things that leads you to an inability to continue, lack of oxygen. Like they say, there's such a thing as the anaerobic threshold where you suddenly, you don't suddenly have enough oxygen. And they talk about a lactate threshold, which they say, that you start developing lactic acid in your muscles because of a lack of oxygen. And that's how the whole thing is pinned together. And also, when you do a bunch of aerobic fitness and you get this aerobic base behind you, the intensity of exercise at which the so-called anaerobic threshold and the so-called lactate thresholds occur moves to the right, i.e. to a higher exercise intensity. So that would seem to back up this idea that a lack of oxygen or a lack of ability to use oxygen is a problem during exercise. Why is it wrong? Okay, it's wrong because human anaerobic exercise capacity is precisely none at all. There is no such thing as anaerobic exercise in human physiological terms whatsoever. The understanding of muscle energetics, the way that a muscle cell is constructed, is vital to grasp this concept, I guess. And it goes like this. In your muscle, energy is produced, if you like, via the oxidation of fats and carbohydrates, mostly, and the mitochondria do that. The mitochondria don't spend energy, they make it. Energy is spent outside the mitochondria, the cell at large, but not within the mitochondria. So the machinery in a muscle cell that causes the muscle cell to contract, the sliding filaments, all of that, that machinery is the stuff that spends the energy that was made by the mitochondria. Okay. All of that stuff, that sliding filament stuff, the stuff that actually makes the muscle mechanically do what muscles do, contract and apply force to bones, all of that is done without oxygen. There is no route for oxygen to play any role in that whatsoever. The amount of, and it's glycogen, by the way, which is glucose starch, which is used as the fuel source to fire that muscle contraction on the sliding filaments. The amount of glycogen that's stored in a muscle fiber, depending on the muscle fiber morphology and which particular muscle of the body it is, etc. On average, though, the amount of glycogen stored in a muscle fiber is enough to cause that muscle fiber to twitch, to contract and relax 1 or 2 times total. And if the mitochondria weren't producing energy, if you suddenly magically could dip into a cell and grab the mitochondria and pull them out of there, or magically wave your wand and make them disappear, that muscle would twitch once or twice, and that's it. Done. No more fuel in that muscle cell. It will not twitch again, or if it's in the middle of a twitch and it runs out of fuel, it will be locked in that aspect. And basically, then what happens very soon after that is that cell will die. That muscle cell will definitely die. So it's not like you have anaerobic system and several anaerobic systems like you're taught in exercise physiology courses. They'll teach you, you've got an aerobic system, that's oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria, and you've got 2 anaerobic systems, that's glycogenolysis and a PCR system. And depending on exercise intensity, that will tell you which system is the one that takes the brunt of the exercise provision. Well, that's false, is what I'm telling you. All muscle contractions require all 3 systems. Here's how they work. Mitochondria produce ATP, but mitochondria do not exude ATP into the cell cytosol. The ATP made by a mitochondria is split by that mitochondria into ADP plus PI, ready for a new resynthesis inside that mitochondria. And at the same time, on the other side of the membrane, it's like two cogs in a gearbox. That energy that the mitochondria is producing is used to put a creatine molecule onto a phosphocreatine molecule. Bam! Now we've got phosphocreatine. And that phosphocreatine is free floating in the cell fluid, and it exudes out to the sliding filaments, and that energy is then used to resynthesize muscle glycogen in between muscle contractions from incoming blood glucose. They are gears in a gearbox. They are all in contact with each other, translating the energy from the mitochondria, where it's generated, to the muscle fibers where it's used. Take any one of those gears out of play, instantaneously, magically somehow, the whole system breaks down. The muscle cell will not work at all. All fitness in muscle fiber contractions is specific to intensity. No amount of aerobic training will prepare you to do heavy weightlifting. No amount of heavy weightlifting will prepare you to do a lot of aerobic work either. So the idea that you need an aerobic base and everything is built on that, absolute nonsense, rubbish. It just shows a complete misunderstanding of exercise physiology. Sorry, very long answer, but very, very good question. There you go.
Yeah, I see a lot of people doing like 20 minutes of cardio, then they'll do an hour of weights and another 20 minutes of cardio. And it's like, just pick a goal and stick to it and use the fibers that you're trying to use to produce the outcome you're trying to create.
That's it. Exactly. I mean, if you go and ask those people doing the cardio, why are you doing that? Most of them won't be able to give you a sensible answer other than that's what my trainer told me to do.
Or they'll say warm up, but their warm up is them dripping with sweat.
Yeah.
On the treadmill.
Yeah. And why do you need to warm up for 20 minutes? If it takes 20 minutes, it's probably not really a warm up. Anyway.
Yes. Outside of training specificity, right? Specificity.
Yes, that's it. Yep.
What should people focus on when planning a resistance training program?
For me, the big ones are safety, which are progressive overload to a sensible level based on your experience as a lifter and your expertise as a lifter and what experienced trainer you might or might not have available to you. Form, doing the exercise correctly. And it's more important to do it correctly than it is to lift more weight doing it incorrectly. I see a lot of guys in the gym doing, bicep curls like this sort of thing and throwing their back around and backwards and forwards and grunting like a pig. No, your breath should be under control. Your form should be under control. You shouldn't be swaying at the hips. It should all come from your biceps. Everything should be rock solid, for example. And yeah, I'd far sooner see you lift a weight correctly than lift a bigger weight and do it incorrectly, because you're only going to hurt yourself at some point. So safety, big one. Progressive overload in your program, such that you always keep your intensity at the right level and your volume at the right level. So as soon as you can easily do 10 reps, let's say you're doing a hypertrophy training program, you want to build muscle mass and you're doing whatever it is, let's say you're doing a deadlift and the weight that you've been struggling to get 8 reps out, suddenly you're doing 10 and it's no real trouble, then you up your weight by 10%. And maybe you'll only get 6 or 7 out. That's okay. Build yourself back up to 8. But as soon as you get to 9 and 10 on that, you need to up that weight again. I see a lot of people getting to a certain point where it gets easier and they could have done 10, but they stop at 8 because you're supposed to stop at 8. Well, you're not progressing. And then they say, well, I'm not growing. And it's because you're not pushing yourself to the right level. You're not asking your body to adjust to a new level of absolute weight in line with trying to get your muscle hypertrophy going, sort of thing. You need to keep the relative intensity the same, which means the absolute weight that you're lifting is going to go up quite rapidly at first when you first start lifting, and then it will level off quite a bit to a point where when you become really quite an experienced lifter, you'll get very little increases in your weights over months. And then you have to start throwing in big negatives or drop sets or pyramiding or changing either the order or the exercises you've got in your program, or changing your split around in some way to get your body guessing again. But for most people who are just starting out, you're going to get lots of strength increases very rapidly up front. So be prepared to actually go with that. Good to get together with a trainer every 4 weeks, I'd say, in the first 3 or 4 months, and just make sure you're on top of it.
Yeah, outlines it really well. So when I'm coaching people, I get them to send me videos of them doing the exercise, And it's all good them saying to me on their plan, I've done 10 reps, 8 reps, 12 reps, whatever, with 50 kilos. But how did you lift that 50 kilos? Were you struggling, or was it no struggle at all? So
Yeah.
Again, I need to use that sort of data to feedback myself and think, okay, this person's not trying hard enough. So it's a great point you made about the issue that people use all these intensifier techniques, but they're not at a point in their training experience and level that they need to use it. So like you said, I'd completely agree to the progressive overload aspect of it. Get your 8 repetitions in and just learn to contract your muscles. That's ultimately what a lot of people struggle to do.
Yeah.
So my next question is a bit nuanced. So is there an argument to be had for utilizing a less intense sub-maximal resistance training routine? And if so, what might it be?
Yeah. On a case-by-case basis, you might have someone who is returning from injury and you need to be a bit careful with that injury, perhaps. That's one example I could think of. You might have someone who's had cardiac issues or blood pressure issues, in which case you would be modifying certain things as well. Like in the case of that, you would not have them doing any overhead lifting whatsoever. And you probably wouldn't have them even benching, frankly. I wouldn't actually have people benching anyway, unless they are power lifters, personally, because I think bench press with a barbell, I think that's one of the stupidest exercises you could do. I think that's a real problem. I think you should do 2 dumbbells, never a barbell for bench press. And yes, you will move less absolute weight that way, but I don't care. It will not affect your pectoral development if you do it correctly. What it will do is save your shoulders from the wrecking they will otherwise get. If you continue to do bench press with a barbell, at some point you will get a shoulder injury. Show me any decent powerlifter who's been a powerlifter for any number of years that's never had a shoulder injury. It's craziness. That's another example of what you're talking about, because if you're lifting with 2 dumbbells on a bench press rather than with a barbell, you are absolutely going to be able to lift less absolute weight. But I'll tell you what, you're stabilizing much more. You're actually activating more of the fibers and more of the synergist muscle groups, absolutely. And as such, you could argue that it's not really even less intense. It is in terms of the absolute weight, though. So there's just two or three examples just quickly off the top of my head. Injury, cardiac or blood pressure issues, and bench press for everybody, except for powerlifters who have to train with a bar because that's how they compete. And in fact, what I say to powerlifters is you might want to consider giving that away because it's not a sensible sport for that very reason. Yeah. In the same way that people that come to me that are ultra marathoners or whatever, or ultra endurance athletes say to me, how should I train for that? I say, well, I could tell you, and absolutely, you want to pay me the money, I will tell you how to train for that. But also it would be irresponsible for me not to say to you, you should give away ultra endurance sport. It's bad for you.
That's exactly why I didn't add that aspect of nuance to when I was talking about the Randall cycle in an earlier video.
Right.
I didn't want to promote it in that sort of way. So a lot of my stuff, just getting strong. That's basically it. But
yeah, I haven't looked at your Randall cycle video yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to your scrutiny.
I shall send you a grade.
Yeah,
no, I won't.
Harry so far approves, so that's 1 out of 2.
Oh, good. Good.
So next question is around recovery. So we kind of covered how muscles work, training. So how would someone know when they're training beyond their recovery capability, if that is such a thing?
Right. In terms of weight training, hypertrophy training, strength training, that kind of thing, in general, on average, some people are better than others in this regard. Some people get away with more than others, whatever. There is individual difference. But as a general rule of thumb, I suggest to most people, and not for people like yourself, John, because obviously this isn't going to work for you at your level and your degree of development, etc. But for the average Joe who just wants to put some muscle mass on from baseline, I'm going to suggest that person does a whole body split 3 times a week and no more, and never train on consecutive days. Once you get to Jonathan's level, sure, you might be doing an upper body, lower body split. You might be doing a push-pull split. You might be doing 3 or 4 splits by the time you're his size, experience, and you've lifted as much as he has. But until then, you're doing a whole body split, top to tail, 3 times a week, and that's made up of probably 10 or 12 exercises that you will complete within 45 minutes. And that includes the shower, all right? And then you're out of there, and you're resting for the next day and you're recuperating and you're taking care of your nutrition in the way that you should, and you're hitting the gym again 2 days later, you should feel 80, 90% recovered on that second day when you hit the gym. Or up to 100 if you do get to 100. But certainly if you get to the gym 2 days after your last training session and you still feel like, you're 65% right, then you actually ought not to be training that day. Because that means you're just going to be dragging your body down. The whole thing with getting fitter is that it's a response to the injury of the training itself is a mild form of muscle injury. That's why the muscle gets bigger, so that it's stronger, more robust, less likely to be damaged in the same way that you've just damaged it in your last training session.
Carnivore Optimized. This isn't just an ebook. It's a call to arms. This is a radical blueprint for those who refuse to bow to the modern health crisis. It's built on ancestral truth, forged in pain, and written by Jonathan Griffiths, autistic athlete, spine disease warrior, and founder of Carnivore Muscle. This 80-plus page guide dismantles the lies we've been sold and hands the power back to you. You'll learn why meat heals and fake food harms, how to restore energy, hormones, and focus, strength training without burnout, tools to beat fatigue, gut issues, and brain fog, how to stay strong in a weak world. Every purchase is a stand against the globalist agenda, fueling a movement to return health, power, and freedom back to the people. Rebuild yourself. Reclaim your fire. Own your biology. Download now.
So you hit the muscle, you damage it, it gets sore, it gets inflamed. It says, rest me, you've damaged me, I need to repair and heal. You need to listen to that and wait till your body is the vast majority back to its best before you hit it again. Otherwise, you're just imposing injury on injury, and that just drags you down over weeks and months, makes you excessively tired, probably makes you want to eat too much, and will drag your strength down, your endurance, your strength endurance as well down. It will drag everything down. And actually, you'll end up not growing. You'll end up depressed and pissed off with the whole idea. And then what are you going to do? You're going to sit on the couch and eat fries or what? I don't know. You'll just give up, won't you? So give your body a chance to recover before you hit it again. You never, ever get fitter lifting weights in the gym. You only ever get fitter when you're resting and recovering from the damage you did to yourself in the gym. More damage in the gym doesn't mean fitter. It means you're not allowing your body to repair. I hope I've been clear on that.
Yeah, completely. You brought up some really good points as well, especially about how frequently you should train. So myself as an advanced lifter, I'm finding when I first started training, I could train 6-7 days a week. But at that point in time, I was not using maximum intensity. Therefore, my results could have been accelerated to some extent. The other issue I had was as I learned how to use intensity to my benefit, I can't train as often as that anymore. It's somewhere between 4 and 5 sessions a week.
All right, cool.
So that's where I'm falling at the moment. And people watching this, like Bart says, give your body time to recover. It's underrated and misunderstood, I think.
Brilliant. And how many splits are you doing?
I'm doing a push-pull leg split.
Right. So you've got 3 splits, basically, or 2 splits, push-pull, top and bottom.
Push-pull
yeah,
and leg.
Right, so
3 splits, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm doing that on a rotation. And the other thing I notice as well with people training is that they seem to think they need to do a 2-on, 1-off, or a 1-on, 1-off, all that sort of thing. But I think you should almost listen to your body in a way. So, I mean, I'm finding if I do more than 2 sessions in a row, my third session will be greatly impacted.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you that there's a recovery aspect you need to do and manage within your own training standard.
You bet.
So the next question is on the idea of central nervous system buildup. So it could be a bit of a false concept in some ways, but maybe a misunderstanding. Is there a possibility that under recovery of the central nervous system, when pushing that hard regularly, is going to be negatively impactful?
Yeah, I think that is a real thing, and I think it is a very real risk for people who overtrain. Remember when I said in an answer to a question a few minutes ago that when you first start lifting, as a novice lifter, your strength goes up really quickly? What actually is underpinning that strength improvement at the very beginning is that there's nothing metabolically any different about your muscles. They're not any bigger, they're not any stronger, There's nothing going on with the way they're biomechanically functioning or metabolically functioning. There's been no change in enzymes or anything yet. But within the first few weeks, despite no physical change in the muscle fibers, you've got stronger. Your maximum strength has gone up. And it's because you've learned how to send the messages from your brain to your muscle fibers more effectively to get them to contract more strongly, more forcibly. So that's relevant in that if you overtrain, whether you're new or whether you're an experienced lifter, what I'm suggesting there is there's a lot of information and a lot of motor programming that your brain has to do, and your nerves are using often as much energy to send the messages to your muscles as your muscles are using reacting to those messages. A lot of people don't understand that. They think all the energy is being spent by the muscles and the messages that fire the muscles are just magically getting there without a metabolic cost somehow. No. Every time a message goes through a nerve line, and there are millions of nerve lines between your brain and your muscles, every time a message goes through one of those nerve lines, it drains that whole line of its resting, what they call membrane potential. And that's made up by having a whole bunch of ions at different concentrations across that membrane. And when you fire off a message through that line, it empties that line out, it drains it empty, and you've got to recharge the thing before it can be used again. And all of that takes energy because you've got to pump all these ions, sodium, potassium, chloride, etc., against their concentration gradients. You've got to actually physically pump these things to set up these resting levels of these ions so that nerve fiber will react again to another message from the brain. And then, of course, upstream of that, the brain has to do the same thing to get those neurons ready to start sending those messages down those lines. So it's like brain, lots of energy, nervous system, lots of energy, muscles, lots of energy. It's not just your muscles. So your nerves absolutely do need time to recover from being really stressed. So I don't think it's a fallacy at all. I think it's a very real thing. And one of the first things that will go if you overtrain when you're lifting is your strength will go. You might have noticed this yourself when you may have overtrained for a few weeks at a time, maybe before a competition or something. And while ever you're peaking ready for the competition, etc., and maybe you're doing a cut because you want to be lean as hell, and your strength goes down just before the comp, you think, oh, it's because I've changed my diet. It might be, but there may well also be a neural component there. You might be fried because right before the comp, you're going to lift your intensity and change your diet. So it's hard to say which one it was, but I'm betting it's both. Yeah.
I'd agree. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say what my creatinine kinase was, but that was through the roof.
Right. Yeah.
A few weeks out. So yeah, there's two aspects to recovery in that sort of way. And you're completely right. The idea that we can just recover our muscles is not going to be enough. There's also the neural firing kind of aspect of it as well.
Yeah.
So the next question is specific towards muscular hypertrophy. Yeah. So you answered this in a recent interview before, but it's not an issue, but I kind of misunderstand what is meant.
Okay.
So you've got yourself that recommends around 1 gram per centimetre of height of protein as the absolute maximum.
Sure.
And you've got Harry Sopanos, as I don't know.
Yeah.
He recommends up to 4 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Yeah.
So you've got two vastly different ideas. I think his is based on HADS and tribes people, and yours is based on some anecdotes, some science, some just experience general.
Yeah.
So how would you push your argument for the 1 gram per centimetre?
It seems to me, and I'm not saying Harry is wrong, and he might well be correct for certain purposes at certain times, that it might well be useful to have vastly more protein coming in than you would maybe do all the time, for example. But it seems to me that there is maximum capacity of the human body to absorb and use amino acids and to incorporate them into growing muscle fibers or to replace protein components of the body as they wear out and all that kind of stuff. Now, obviously, John, your ability to absorb and use protein, is an absolute amount of protein even, is going to be more than mine. You're taller than me. You're a lot more muscular. I wouldn't be surprised if you weigh twice what I do, frankly. So you're going to be able to absorb more protein. But what we normally talk about with the protein is as a function of something like either your ideal lean mass or your height or something like that. So I've got two figures that I normally use. For your average Joe Blow who's just getting started, hypertrophy, who isn't really particularly muscled yet, or for generalized people who are not trying to gain muscle mass, I would say to those people 1.75 grams of protein in total per kilogram of ideal lean body mass is probably a good sort of a number. For lifters like yourself, I say generally, you don't really want to go much over 1 gram per centimetre in height. And the reason for that is because even as a quite muscled person, you are not going to be able to absorb a huge amount of protein. More than someone like myself, absolutely, but still not a huge amount. And any excess protein that's still left over after that, because you're thinking, oh, protein's great, I can eat as much protein as I like. No, because it's gluconeogenic. So you might as well just eat sugar beyond a certain point. So I think that absolutely up to 4 grams of protein immediately following or during an illness of a particular kind might be handy. Maybe it's at a time when there's very little fat available during a year, if you're one of the HADs or whatever, potentially. But I wouldn't necessarily say that I'd be hugely thrilled with someone taking in 4 grams per kilogram every day as a standard. I think that's too much, personally.
Yeah, that explains it very well. So when you read these articles online, they'll say, this is how many grams you should have per pound per kilo, but it doesn't really elaborate like that. So I'm glad you went over that. As someone who has pushed the envelope with protein intake up to a 1.550 grams, so the time that would be 5 grams per kilogram, so it's even more than what Harry would suggest. I can say your digestive rate is slower.
Yeah.
Therefore, the way you feel isn't quite as good. Also, I didn't notice that I retained muscle mass any better than I would on, say, 200 grams of protein.
Yeah.
So there's that as well. And like you said, the idea that you can overeat it and not get fat, in essence.
Sorry.
It's you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's not going to work. Your body has developed fantastic strategies to take the best advantage for your survival from the available resource that you give it. If you eat too much sugar, it will be stored as fat. If you eat too much fat, it will be stored as fat. If you eat too much protein, that protein will be turned into sugar first, and then that sugar will be turned into fat. Simple as that. Hey, that rhymes. I'm a poet, and I didn't know it. Yeah. What did you think of my little poem there, Ted?
Bollocks!
God. I don't know why I ask. I really don't. He's hopeless.
Oh, I'm sure it'll come up with some other terms in maybe years to come.
Maybe.
Who knows?
Yeah.
So I've got one more question before I wrap this up. And it is, again, touching on what we went over last time, which is the high fat thing.
Yeah.
So a lot of people that watch my videos ask about high fat intake, 80% of your effective energy. So you mentioned last time that some people might have a overactive gluconogenic pathway. So what is that concept and how would it apply to people?
If someone has an overactive gluconogenic pathway, that means that they would be more likely to produce glucose from some of the gluconeogenic precursors, such as lactate, maybe some of the gluconeogenic amino acids from protein, as we've just been talking about when you eat too much protein, but also glycerol backbones from triacylglyceride molecules, fat molecules, basically. So if you're consuming hugely too much protein and hugely too much fat and not enough protein, then you will be breaking down more molecules and there'll be more glycerol backbones left over, and they will then push back on the gluconeogenic pathway, and then those will be formed into sugar, So that's kind of how that can impact. Again, it's when you've got a system that's so complex and has so many positive and negative feedback looping systems that feed back on itself. It's one of those things that can go a lot of different ways in an individual person at any given time on the basis of the balance of everything that person is going through in terms of their training, their sleep, their stress levels, endocrine functioning, hormonal functioning, time of year, age and stage, all of those things, and it can be near impossible to predict. One of the best things that you can do, if you have the kit for it and you have the capacity for it, is just to keep an eye on your blood glucose, your fasting blood glucose, and also to keep an eye on your A1C, or your HbA1c it's sometimes called. There you go, there's an example of a glucose meter there. Is that one a glucose or a glucose A1C as well?
Just glucose.
Right. So you can get dual meters as well for glucose and for A1C, I think. You can get also meters that measure ketones as well. I wouldn't bother, frankly. Don't bother testing your ketones. It's a complete waste of time. The main thing is to keep an eye on what your blood sugar is doing. If your blood sugar is drifting up and your protein is quite significant in your diet, then I would pull your protein back relative to your fat, and you'll hit a sweet spot. If your protein's very low and your fat's very high and your A1C is drifting up or your resting is drifting up, bring your protein up and bring your fat down. There is a sweet spot. It's one of those graphs for both protein and fat. And of course, it goes without saying that your dietary intake of carbohydrates ought to be, whether you're a lifter or not, whether you're an athlete or not, as close to zero as you can possibly attain and maintain throughout your life, the better. So it's just then becomes an N=1 experimentation of dialing in those two independent knobs, fat and protein, until you hit the right level for both. Well, really it's three knobs. It's individual protein, absolute value, individual fat, absolute value, and then kind of a result of both of those is the hysteresis knob, the kind of percentage. I find for most people that 80-20 is often pushing the limit in terms of how much fat. And that's by way of energy, by the way, energy. Once you get much over 80% fat and your protein drops below about 20, you're going to get into trouble. In fact, you might even be in trouble at 80-20 for a lot of people. That's often too high. So those are the factors I look at. So when someone comes to me and says, I'm having a problem, it's not working well for me, but the first thing I go to is microbiome. Have they upset their microbiome? Have they just gone carnivore sometime in the last 6 months? Did they hammer over one day and decide to go carnivore the next day instead of doing a proper transition? If it's not that, then I go, right, let's have a look at your macronutrient profile. Let's look at your fat to protein ratio. If they don't know, I get them to keep a really good record for 2 or 3 weeks and get back to me. If we can talk about it simply because they have been recording and they do know, then we say, right, okay, that looks like too much protein or not enough protein, too much fat, not enough fat, and we just juggle around. And then there's an optimal for each individual person based on where they're at that time. There's an average best, and that's where I usually start, and then we adjust from there. And what I have found in my practice, in my experience, as an average, as a rule of thumb, the best ratio of fat to protein turns out to be about 66-33 for most people. Plus or minus about 5% either way.
Carnivore Optimized. This isn't just an ebook, it's a call to arms. This is a radical blueprint for those who refuse to bow to the modern health crisis. It's built on ancestral truth, forged in pain, and written by Jonathan Griffiths, autistic athlete, spine disease warrior, and founder of Carnivore Muscle. This 80-plus page guide dismantles the lies we've been sold and hands the power back to you. You'll learn why meat heals and fake food harms, how to restore energy, hormones, and focus, strength training without burnout, tools to beat fatigue, gut issues, and brain fog, how to stay strong in a weak world. Every purchase is a stand against the globalist agenda, fueling a movement to return health, power, and freedom back to the people. Rebuild yourself, reclaim your fire, own your biology. Download now